The morning sun broke over the Texas plains like a warm promise, spilling gold across the quiet ranch land. Dust swirled around the corrals as horses neighed softly, their breath rising like mist in the cold air. It was the kind of morning that made a man thankful he had work to do in a sky wide enough to dream under. Eli Turner, known across 3 counties as the giant rancher, stood outside his barn, the brim of his hat low over his rugged face. He was tall, towering, really and broad through the shoulders, the sort of man who seemed carved out of oak and hard years. Folks said he could lift a hay bale like a sack of feathers and mend fences faster than 3 men combined. But for all his size and strength, Eli had a quiet soul. He had lost his wife years ago during a fever that swept through town, and since then, he had learned to speak more with his eyes than his mouth. The ranch kept him busy, but his heart carried a silence that not even the wide-open land could fill. One late afternoon, while heading to town for supplies, Eli stopped his wagon near a small, worn-out cottage on the edge of a dry creek. He noticed smoke coming from the chimney but no sign of life outside. His horse, Scout, pawed at the ground nervously. That's when Eli heard a soft voice, foreign, hesitant. "Sir, please, wait." He turned and saw a young woman running toward him. Her dress was old but neatly mended, her face pale with exhaustion. Her black hair shone in the fading light, and her eyes dark and wide spoke of both strength and sorrow. Behind her stood an older woman, her mother perhaps, watching with guarded suspicion. The young woman bowed slightly before speaking again. "I'm sorry to stop you. Our roof leaks, and my mother is ill. We have no firewood. Could I work for you, maybe clean, or cook? Just for food?" Eli studied her quietly. Her accent was gentle but clear, and her words carried the weight of pride being swallowed for survival. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Li Mei," she said softly. "My mother, Madam Chen." Eli glanced at the older woman, who stood straighter at the mention, her gaze sharp as a knife. "You don't have to work for food," Eli said. "I've got extra supplies at the ranch. I can bring them over tomorrow." But Madam Chen stepped forward, her voice like iron wrapped in silk. "We don't take charity from strangers. My daughter will work." Eli's lips curved faintly, though not quite into a smile. "Then let's say she'll help me cook for a day, and I'll pay her fare. Does that sound better?" The older woman hesitated, then gave a curt nod. That evening, Li Mei came to the Turner ranch. The big house stood strong and simple against the setting sun. Inside, it smelled of cedar and dust, untouched for years. Eli showed her to the kitchen, where she moved like someone who knew the rhythm of hard work. She cleaned, cooked, and even fixed the old curtains. When she served him supper, Eli was surprised it was simple stew, yet somehow richer than anything he'd tasted in months. He watched her as she sat quietly, folding her hands. "You cook well," he said finally. "My father taught me before he passed," she replied. "He was a scholar in China, before we came here." Eli nodded. "You've been through a lot." Li Mei smiled faintly. "Everyone has their story." Over the next few weeks, she came by often to help. Her mother still watched from a distance, but little by little, the frost between them began to thaw. The neighbors started to talk, of course they always did. "Giant Turner's got a Chinese girl helping him now," they'd whisper at the general store. "Bet she's trying to trap him for marriage." Eli ignored them. He wasn't a man swayed by gossip. He saw the truth in her eyes, a quiet dignity, a will to survive, and perhaps, beneath it all, a spark of something deeper. One evening, after a storm had rolled through and left the land smelling of rain and mud, Li Mei came to the ranch late, her hair wet and her clothes torn. She was trembling. Eli rushed to her side. "What happened?" he demanded. "Men," she whispered. "On the road they said words I didn't understand, then, they laughed and tried to." Eli didn't wait for her to finish. He saddled Scout and thundered down the muddy road. He found the men drinking by the creek, their laughter still in the air. He didn't speak. He just dismounted, walked up, and hit the first man so hard he flew into the mud. The others scrambled, but none dared draw their guns when they saw the look in Eli's eyes, cold, steady, righteous. "You ever come near that girl again," he said, his voice low, "and you'll wish you hadn't been born." The men fled. When he returned, Li Mei was sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. He crouched beside her. "They won't bother you again," he said softly. Her eyes glistened. "Why do you care so much?" Eli hesitated. "Because no one should have to live afraid. And because, maybe I care more than I should." She turned to him then, her eyes searching his. For a long moment, the world outside disappeared. Days passed. Weeks turned into months. Li Mei became part of the ranch, her laughter lightening the silence that had haunted it for years. She tamed the horses with a calm Eli admired, and she spoke to the wind as if it were an old friend. One spring morning, Eli found her sitting on the porch, sewing. He took a breath, his hands rough and uncertain. "Li Mei," he began, "I know I ain't the kind of man you ever pictured yourself with. I'm rough around the edges. But I'd like you to stay as my wife." She froze, needle trembling between her fingers. Before she could speak, her mother's voice rang out from the gate. "No one marries my Chinese daughter." Madame Chen's face was set like stone, her eyes full of storm. She stepped forward, her hands shaking but her spine straight. "Do you know what they'll say, Mr. Turner? A Chinese girl marrying a white rancher? She'll never be accepted. They'll mock her. They'll call her names. You'll ruin her life." Eli stood his ground. "She's already had to fight for her place in this world. But if she stands with me, no one will lay a hand or word against her. I'll see to that." Madame Chen shook her head. "You don't understand. In our culture, a daughter's marriage is her family's honor. She can't marry an outsider." Eli took off his hat, holding it to his chest. "Then maybe your ways are different from ours. But where I come from, a man's worth is in how he treats others. And your daughter deserves someone who sees her heart, not just her skin." For a long time, silence hung in the air. Then Li Mei rose. "Mother," she said gently, "I love you. But I can't live my life hiding from the world. Mr. Turner has shown me kindness when no one else would. He's given us food, safety, respect. I can't turn away from that." Madame Chen's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing more. She turned away, shoulders trembling. Eli stepped forward, placing a hand over Li Mei's. "You sure about this?" he asked softly. She smiled through her tears. "I've never been more sure." Their wedding was small, just a few neighbors and the preacher who didn't care about gossip. The townsfolk whispered, but none dared say a word to Eli's face. He stood tall beside Li Mei, her white dress simple yet radiant against her dark hair. When the preacher said the words, Eli's deep voice trembled slightly as he vowed to protect and cherish her for all his days. After the ceremony, they rode back to the ranch. Together, the land stretched before them like a new beginning. Madame Chen stood on the porch waiting, her eyes still glistening. When Li Mei approached, her mother took her hands, wordless at first. Then she whispered, "If your father were alive, he'd have wanted your happiness. Be strong, my daughter." Years passed, and the Turner ranch flourished. The once silent house became a place of laughter, music, and warmth. Li Mei brought color to everything she touched. Flowers bloomed where she planted them, and the animals seemed calmer when she walked by. She taught the ranch hands bits of her language, and soon even the toughest cowboys were greeting her with shy ni-hows and awkward bows. The townsfolk, once skeptical, began to respect her. They saw how she worked beside her husband, mending fences, tending to cattle, and nursing injured horses. They saw how Eli's eyes softened every time he looked at her, and they realized theirs was not a scandal, it was a love story the land itself seemed to bless. When their first child was born, a boy with his father's size and his mother's gentle eyes, the entire town showed up with gifts. Madame Chen held the baby in her arms, whispering blessings in Mandarin. The ranch hands cheered, and Eli, for the first time in years, laughed loud and long. But not everything was easy. Some still whispered behind their backs. Once, a man at the saloon sneered, "Turner, never thought you'd stoop to marrying one of them." Eli's answer was calm but sharp as a whip. "She's worth more than any man who'd speak like that." Word spread fast, and from that day, no one dared insult the Turner family again. Over time, Li Mei opened a small school on the ranch for immigrant children, Chinese, Mexican, Irish, anyone who couldn't attend the town school. Eli built the desks himself, and Madame Chen taught calligraphy while Li Mei taught English. It became a place of hope, and even the mayor praised it one day, saying, "That Turner ranch is doing more for this town than we ever did." Years later, when Madame Chen grew frail, she spent her last days by the window, watching her daughter and son-in-law work side by side. One evening, she called Li Mei close and said, "I was wrong to fear. Love is stronger than blood, stronger than pride. Promise me you'll keep teaching that." Li Mei wept as she nodded, holding her mother's hand until the old woman drifted into peace. Eli buried her beneath the old willow tree by the creek, the same place where he'd first met Li Mei years before. As they stood there, the wind moved softly through the leaves, carrying with it the echoes of the past. The seasons rolled on. Eli grew older, his beard turning silver, but his strength never seemed to fade. On quiet evenings, he'd sit on the porch with Li Mei, watching their children chase fireflies across the yard. "You remember when your mother said no one would marry her Chinese daughter?" he said once, a gentle smile touching his lips. Li Mei laughed softly. "I remember you said something that shocked us all." Eli chuckled. "Guess I did. What was it you said again?" she teased. He looked out over the fields, the sunset painting everything in gold. "I said I wasn't marrying a Chinese girl. I was marrying the bravest woman I'd ever met." Li Mei reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. The years had lined their faces, but their hearts still beat in perfect rhythm. As twilight fell, the land around them glowed with peace, the kind of peace that comes only when love has weathered every storm and stood unbroken. And though many years would pass, and stories would fade, the folks in town would still whisper about the day the giant rancher stood up to the world and married the woman everyone told him not to. They'd say it was shocking. They'd say it was bold. But those who knew Eli and Li Mei knew the truth. It wasn't shock. It was love. The kind of love that changes hearts, bridges worlds, and leaves behind a story that even time itself can't erase.